Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with part 3, the final chapter for the 1/16 scale radio-controlled Israeli Tiran 5 tank. This model here is built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. As I touched upon before, this is the third and final installment to a 3-part video series dedicated to this build over here. Part 1, I review the model at the beginning of the project, as well as I take the viewer along during the construction phases, going over several of the mechanical upgrades and several of the conversion steps required to bring the model up to this condition. Part 2 is where I focus entirely on just the external detail fittings, which, as you can tell, that's going to be quite a lot of stuff to talk about. And part 3, we're just going to be taking this model for a test drive. So stay tuned, because there's going to be, hopefully, a really cool video zipping around outdoors. Before I go ahead and take this model outside to take a test drive, I'm going to go over all of the RC functions while the model's still indoors, because, well, this information is a bit tricky to do when the vehicle is outside. As I mentioned in the first video, the model's electronics were replaced from the stock Hooben to a unit from Taigen. However, one thing that I forgot to mention in the first video was exactly which Taigen unit that I installed in this vehicle. Because of all the tanks Taigen has in their catalog, with all the different sound systems that are available, there are several options that are on the market. Of course, this vehicle being a T55 and Taigen not producing a T55, I needed to find a sound system that was going to closely mimic the sound that would be present on the actual vehicle. Fortunately, finding a solution wasn't going to be hard, because Taigen has a vehicle that is very similar to the T55 sound-wise, and that is the KV1. The KV1 and the T55 both feature a V12 diesel engine, so sound-wise the two vehicles are going to be very similar. For the electronics itself, I went with the T5 system. This one here, I believe, is one of their newer units with a little push button for the MG flash that you'll see momentarily when I turn the model on. The vehicle does also have proportional drive, and it also has proportional smoke, which means the smoke system is tied into the throttle, so the more throttle you give it, the more smoke will be emitted by the smoke generator. The smoke generator itself, again, is a standard 1/16 scale unit. This one here was supplied by the customer who sent me the tank. The smoke system does work, and you do see a little bit of smoke puffing out during the tank's operation. However, just like with all smoke systems, they look pretty neat indoors, but the second you take it outside, the smoke just gets blown away very quickly with this small little gust of wind. Briefly rethreading on the information I said in the other video, the main power switch is housed underneath the driver's hatch. The driver's hatch was modified to have a spring holding it down, so that you always have constant pressure keeping the hatch in the closed manner. This is important because of the tank's operation. You don't want the thing flopping around, because it could potentially wedge the turret, which is a bad thing indeed. Under the area here, you will have a switch, but you also have a recharge jack so that you can go ahead and charge the model without having to open it up. This is a common feature that I incorporate on my 1/16 RC builds, and basically all of my RC builds for that matter. However, for the Tiran 5 here, it's even more that important, because as we saw in the other video, this thing is just encrusted with really frail, fragile, and easily snagged details, and the last thing you want to do is having to manhandle this thing by taking it apart in order to get access to the battery. So in order to charge the tank, you simply open up the hatch, yank out the recharge jack, plug it into your favorite 7.2 recharger, and the model can charge in peace. When it's done, you just take the wiring, stuff it back in, and you can power on the vehicle. The smoke system fluid spout is also found in this area over here. It's just a black rubber tube with a cap on the end, as we saw in part 1 of the video. With the wire tucked in, you can see the main power switch right over there. And one thing that I just noticed that I forgot to do on this build, that's something that I always do on these builds, is I forgot to paint the switch in red so that it has higher visibility. This, of course, is something I am going to be taking care of, and it's going to be done after the filming of this video. Underneath the loader's hatch, we have some more switches, and these are for some of the other functions that this model does have. First is this little switch that's all the way on the bottom over here. It's a toggle switch. That is the cutoff switch for the main firing animation. That's something that you generally never mess with, and basically it's tucked in the bowels of the turret, because again, it's something that you don't really need to touch. The next switch is this one right over here, and this is the three-way switch for the lighting system that I touched upon in the other videos. In the center, the lights are off. To one direction, it turns on the day, or I should say the white light, and in the opposite direction, it turns on the infrared. To turn the model on, first the radio is turned on, which is always something I recommend. Then the tank is powered on. From there, you hit the switch here, and it should start up the sound system. I'll also turn on the smoke system, which is controlled by this toggle switch that we have here. The unit takes a little bit to heat up, but once it starts puffing away, it does it in a constant manner. Again, it's patched into the throttle, so the more juice you give it, the more smoke gets emitted by the exhaust. Of course, all the drive is done with this stick over here. As I stated before, there is proportional drive on this system. All of the turret controls are done with this stick over here. Left and right will rotate the turret to those directions. For the main tube, this is elevated and depressed with one motion, and that's by going down here on the radio. Just like with most of these other RTR builds, the system is on a track, and it first goes down, and then dips up, and then goes down again. Which you'll be able to see if I actuate the channel. Moving up will actually fire the main animation. By pushing this button here on the radio, this will trigger the MG firing animation. And here you get to see what it looks like with the IR lights turned on. As I touched upon before, the headlight shield here is fully removable with the use of no tools. And once removed, you have the animation now in better, lack of a better term, light. So that's all we need to talk about indoors. From here, let's bounce to this thing being outside, where I could go ahead and actually start running it. well, I can't think of anything else I would want to see more in a test run. The tank performed absolutely perfectly. As you can see, the stock Taigen electronics, although they were designed for a different type of vehicle, transitioned into the T55 here from Hooben, and performance-wise, there really weren't any issues. The model was driven both on and off-road. The off-road section in the beginning was where I drive my 1/6 scale tanks, so that terrain is really not necessarily conducive for something in 1/16, but the T55 here was able to eat it up without really causing any problems. I did notice that occasionally the model would snag up here or there. That has to do with more or less the design of the tank itself. The sprockets have a propensity of snagging up foreign particulate, and with the low hull area of the T55, it seemed like that things like sticks and twigs were getting caught up into the tracks and jamming them up. If this does happen, if you are running a Hooben T55 model, all you gotta do is stop what you're doing, back the model up, and then go forward again, and that should clear the obstruction. If not, well, then you're gonna have to do some plucking. This was also the first time that I had the opportunity to test drive a Hooben T55 outdoors. The last Hooben example I did, I test drove it on my sterilized testing area that I had at the time, and although that area was fantastic for just making sure the model worked with all of its functions, you don't really get to see or appreciate the vehicle overcoming different type of obstacles. So you don't see the model going on turf or grass, hills, obstacles, things like that, which we saw over here. Having the experience now, yeah, the model does perform great. It's a fun tank to drive. Most tanks are fun, but this one was another one. You know, it's up there, ranks up there with several of the other really fun models that I've driven in the past. And yeah, it just performed without really any hiccups. One thing that I did notice on this one, I believe I ran into this on the other example as well, is that the front wheel, with the way the swing arm is designed on the T55, it has this little articulating feature on it, and occasionally it wants to hang up on you. This is more or less indicative of the model, I guess, being new and still, you know, fresh with its tolerances, and it's possibly something that's going to just break in over time, which is something that I think is happening right now. But other than that, yeah, it's a nice solid runner. Something else I want to mention is with the model's tin work. As we recall from the previous video, the tin work on this model was replaced with new 3D printed sets that I designed, and the two front mud flaps are fully articulating, which, as you saw, came in really handy when I was running the model off-road. They were flopping up and down, having clearance from when foreign particulate would be dragged over the tracks, and that was something that worked really, really well. The pieces held up. I didn't break anything. Even the rubber sections, which were glued on the front and the back, held up absolutely perfectly. Again, there's nothing more I could have wanted to go any better in this test run. The vehicle's runtime is also really, really good. The tank still has a ton of more juice left in it if I wanted to continue running it. It's just that, as fun as it is, I do have other things to do today, sadly, because, you know, once I'm done running it, I'm not going to be able to run it again because it's going to be sent off to the customer. But one thing that I always recommend for anyone who has these RC models to change is the battery. The stock batteries that generally come with RTR models have a moderate milliamperage limit on them, which, you know, it's good to get you off the ground. You get to run it and play around with it. However, if you want to improve the performance, one really simple and relatively affordable way to do it is just simply change out the battery. This one here has a 5,000 milliamp battery that I picked up off of Amazon.com. It's the same battery that I use on all of my 116s, and the link is found in the video description. The unit just drops directly in place, swaps out the kit battery, and you are left with something that has far better capabilities compared to the stock units. That's not so much true for this one here because the Hooben kit version does not give you a battery, of course, but I believe the pre-built RTR one does. But that's, you know, something, I guess, more akin for another video for another time. From here, I'm going to go ahead, bring the model back into the shop. Maybe I'll run it a little bit more just for joyride or two, but I'm going to bring the model back into the shop, and with a pair of tweezers, I'm going to remove all the little bits of leaves and salad that are left in between the row wheels over there in the sprocket. This always happens when you run a model outdoors, and it's no point getting that on camera, so let's go ahead, kick back to the filming area where we could go ahead and wrap up this video. In the end, to say that I'm really happy in how this build turned out would be a massive understatement. Not just am I super thrilled at the final outcome, but I am also extremely proud of the end result. Which is why it's really going to hurt to get this thing boxed up and shipped off to the customer, because this model here is just gorgeous. The customer picked a really cool vehicle for me to model, and considering the condition that the base starter model was in at the beginning of the project, it really has matured into a really gorgeous piece. This thing is going to be, I hope, the centerpiece of his collection, and I'm pretty sure he's going to appreciate it as much as I appreciated building it. It really is that special of a build. I believe this is actually one of the more complex and advanced 1/16 builds that I've done in quite a while. The last time that I've done something on a similar level that required this much conversion work was either the M490 or I believe it was the other two Israeli tanks that I've done. I've done both a M50 and an M51 Super Sherman, and both of those were pretty demanding on the amount of detail accessories that need to have been fabricated and added to the build. This one here definitely is in a similar vein, but I think this one was more advanced because of all the other features that I had to develop for it. So yeah, this was definitely one that I couldn't be any happier in how it turned out, and it's gonna sting getting this one boxed. Another thing that I'm grateful for is that I doubted very much I would have ever have undertaken a Tiran 5 project for my own collection under my own accord. I always knew about the Tiran 5. I always thought they were very interesting vehicles in their own right. However, with the amount of kits and models that I have in my backlog and on my to-do list, I doubted very much I would have ever have done one myself. However, now that I've built one of these models and converted one of these Hoobens, I really have a burning desire to get another one and to add one of these to my collection. So I'll probably be hitting up AliExpress after the filming of this video. However, before that day does arrive, I do have one small consolation prize, and that is, before I was able to really dig into this one over here, in order to help me scale up all of the components that you see on this model, I went ahead and needed a little builder's aid, and that builder's aid was supplied with this little fella here. This model is a Tamiya 1/35 scale Tiran 5 kit that I went ahead and built alongside the bigger brother. So, at least while this one is at its new home with the customer, I have the mini-me version over here as a nice little memento and as a nice, interesting addition to my collection. Of course, this model here is going to be the subject matter of its own model showcase video, which should hopefully drop shortly after this video series here. So definitely stay tuned for that. And that's really all there is to it. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and get this fella boxed up, shipped on its way, so then I can progress on the next 1/16 scale model, be it for me or for commission. So until then, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/16 scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other smaller and larger scale model content that I generally post on this channel. Another way to keep in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again, and I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.